Hello everyone and welcome back to the next installment of our 10.1 raid guides, proudly presented by Kingston Fury. This is Crazy Puck for Method, and today we'll show you how to defeat Sarkareth in Heroic Avarice. Sarkareth is a 3-phase encounter. It's a short, hectic, fast-paced fight. Even though it's only about 6 to 7 minutes long, there's a lot of mechanics and a lot of ways to die. This fight is a substantial step up from Heroic Neltharion, so expect it to take a little while for your entire raid to learn it. Let's jump right in. Throughout the fight, you'll deal with a debuff called Oblivion. Nearly all void damaging abilities apply stacks of this debuff, which deals mild ticking damage for 25 seconds. If you reach 10 stacks, you're transported to the Shadow Realm and cannot interact with the boss or any players. Inside the Shadow Realm, you'll see 3 Soak Swirlies and a bunch of small floating motes called Astral Flares. Each flare you touch gives you a stacking buff, increasing your haste by 5% and movement speed by 10%, capped at 10 stacks. Once you've run through all 3 soak circles, you come back to the normal realm. Aside from Oblivion, each phase has its own set of mechanics. At the start of phase 1, the boss casts Oppressing Howl, knocking everyone back slightly and applying a permanent debuff that augments some other phase 1 abilities. When you're actually hit by any of those abilities though, it'll remove the Oppressing Howl debuff and cause a minor explosion of damage to the raid. Mass Disintegrate puts a line towards a few random players for 6 seconds, then shoots a bolt at them, dealing moderate arcane damage. If you have the Howl debuff, it'll also apply a new debuff for the rest of phase 1, dealing moderate ticking damage and slowing you by 25%. Searing Breath is a frontal cone that pulses 3 times. Each pulse deals moderate damage and applies a 12-second dot. If you have Howl, it'll also apply the Seared debuff, which is a moderate dot that lasts the rest of phase 1. Glittering Surge is an AoE ability that deals moderate damage over 8 seconds and can't be avoided. If you have the Howl debuff, it'll also stun you and apply a significantly stronger dot for 12 seconds and basically kill you. The first one comes out a couple seconds into the fight before Howl, and the second one comes out at a minute 40. We found the best way to clear your Howl debuffs is the Mass Disintegrate, as it's just overall safer. You should aim to have 6 to 8 players clearing their Howl debuff from each cast of Mass Disintegrate. If you go much higher than that, the AoE explosions will kill off the raid. There's 4 Mass Disintegrate casts, so that should be more than enough to clear everybody. Pre-assign your soak groups and make sure everybody clears the Howl before the Glittering Surge at a minute and 40. Aside from all of that, there's a few more things in phase 1 to deal with. Drifting Embers throws a whole bunch of little red swirlies at you, so dodge these. Burning Claws is the tank mechanic, applying a 27-second fire damage dot. When it expires, it'll explode, dealing 15% of the total ticking damage the tank took to the rest of the raid. Tanks should keep mitigation running during the dot to reduce the damage, and they should also swap immediately after each Burning Claws cast. When Sarkareth casts Scorching Bomb, several firebombs will spawn randomly under a few players. These pulse for AoE damage within 10 yards every second. After 12 seconds, the bombs explode, dealing moderate raid-wide damage and applying a 5-second raid-wide dot. You'll also get a puddle of fire under where each bomb exploded, which lasts for all of phase 1 and grows slowly over time. Standing in the fire is bad, so move out of it. Positioning wise, start with the boss near where he is. When the bombs come out, move away as fast as possible. The raid should stay mostly in melee range to help the healers. This will also bait the bombs to be close to each other, maximizing how much space you have. Use healing cooldowns if necessary for the tank debuff explosions. After the Glittering Surge cast, phase 1 ends and you'll enter what's basically a short intermission. During this intermission, the boss will fly back to the front of the room, go immune, hover in the air, and rapidly throw out volleys of little shadow bolts at the entire raid. The bolts apply stacks of Oblivion and will eventually send the entire raid into the Shadow Realm. Inside the Shadow Realm, you'll want to go and collect your motes and run over your soak circles to come back up. The boss will be casting End Existence, which is a 20-second cast. If this completes, you wipe. So, you'll want to tank to get back up first and interrupt the cast with about 3 seconds left. As soon as you interrupt, phase 2 begins. You'll get several new mechanics for phase 2. Desolate Blossom puts a couple void circles on the ground. These tick every half second to anybody standing in them, dealing mild damage and applying stacks of Oblivion. The boss periodically spawns 2 void bombs on the floor, which last 20 seconds. The bombs then explode, dealing heavy ticking damage to the raid over 4 seconds. If the bomb explodes in the Shadow Realm, it'll instead be completely harmless. You'll want to pre-assign 2 people to be bomb runners. They need to pick up the bombs as quickly as possible and then run into a Desolate Blossom, get stacks and get sent to the Shadow Realm, and let the bomb explode down there. While down there, make sure to collect your 10 stack buff and then come up right after the bomb explodes and start nuking. During the Abyssal Breath, the boss will fly in the air and breathe shadow goop puddles onto the ground, spawning several Null Glimmer adds. These will cast Blasting Screen, dealing heavy raid-wide damage and interrupting player casts. You'll need to interrupt these or things get bad really quickly. They can also be stunned. The adds will also have a buff called Rescind, which heals them for 4% health every second. This can be removed by dragging them into a Desolate Blossom Void Zone, so the tanks should do this as quickly as possible. They don't need to stay in there, they just need to touch the Void Zone. You can also utilize grips and knockbacks, and anything really that'll move them around to bump them into the Void Zone to help remove the Rescind buff quickly. To help kill the adds as fast as possible, you can actually have your strongest AoE players stand in the Desolate Blossom about 12 seconds before the Abyssal Breath. They'll get their 10 stacks of Oblivion pretty quickly and be sent to the Shadow Realm, and in there they should collect their motes and then come back up with the full haste buff right as the Abyssal Breath happens. This will help dramatically increase your overall damage to the adds, making them way less dangerous. The adds gain stacks of Ebon Might over time, and at 5 stacks of this they become immune to interrupts and crowd control, which will probably just wipe you, so killing them quickly and efficiently is very important. Aside from adds and Desolate Blossoms, there's 2 other things to deal with in Phase 2. Infinite Duress applies a 30-second dot to a random player. When it expires or is dispelled, it'll deal moderate raid-wide damage and knock everyone back. The affected player should run towards the edge of the room, with everyone else stacked near melee range with the boss, and then you'll want to dispel the target. Make sure not to get knocked back into any goop on the ground. For the player with the actual debuff, it'll knock you backwards from wherever you are facing, so make sure you're facing the edge of the platform so you don't get knocked off. Side note, if you try going to the Shadow Realm with the Infinite Duress, it just explodes on the raid the second you get sent down. Lastly, you have Void Claws, the tank mechanic. This applies an 18-second dot that also reduces healing taken by 25%. When it expires, it'll explode and deal damage in a 20-yard radius, so the tank should just move away from the raid. Alternatively, the tank can just go into the Shadow Realm. You'll rinse and repeat all of this until the boss reaches 40%, at which point you push into Phase 3. As a note, Oblivion ticks pretty hard once you're above 5 stacks, so if you get to that point, you'll want to reset stacks. Go stand in a Desolate Blossom until you get sent into the Shadow Realm, and while you're down there you may as well collect your motes for your haste buff. Come back out with 10 stacks and blast the boss. As Phase 3 starts, the boss will fly to the front of the room again, taking 99% less damage and starting to push everyone away from him. After about 10 seconds he'll land, destroying the giant window in the front of the room, knocking everyone back away from it and clearing all Desolate Blossom pools and goop puddles from the floor. Make note of where that window was, it's actually part of a mechanic here. In Phase 3, Void Bombs, Infinite Duress, and Void Claws all return. They're all the same as Phase 2, except that the explosion from Void Claws is no longer 20-yard range, it's instead raid wide. Tanks will want to go into the Shadow Realm for the explosion so nobody else takes that damage. Throughout Phase 3, you'll also have a constant barrage of small purple swirlies called Motes of Oblivion. These don't really do much damage when you soak them, but they do apply 5 stacks of the Oblivion debuff if you're hit. You can actually use this to your advantage, which we'll get to in a bit. When the boss casts Cosmic Ascension, he'll disappear and make a giant void circle on the ground. After a few seconds, the circle explodes, killing anyone inside of it. 3 Null Glimmer adds will also spawn, except in Phase 3, there's no way to dispel the Rescind healing buff. Right after the explosion, you'll have several large purple swirlies spawn under random players. These explode and leave behind astral formations, which are basically large asteroids that'll lay on the ground and be surrounded by a void goop. Embrace of Nothingness is your standard meteor style soak mechanic, dealing massive damage split between everybody hit. You'll want at least 5 people soaking this, and more is better. Also, any asteroids that are within the soak will actually be destroyed. Hurtling Barrage is similar to Phase 1's Mass Disintegrate, creating lines between the boss and a couple random players. Anyone hit takes a large chunk of damage, so no one other than the targets should get hit by this. The last mechanic here is Scouring Eternity. This shoots void energy from where the window was at the front of the room, hitting everybody in the normal phase for lethal damage. During this, all asteroids that are still up will have a line appear behind them facing away from the window. Standing in these lines prevents you from dying to Scouring Eternity, so make sure to hide. After the cast ends, any remaining asteroids will pulse for raid-wide damage and knock everyone back. Later in the fight, as you start having a large number of asteroids, this pulse of damage gets pretty significant. One last note here, if you're in the Shadow Realm at the time of Scouring Eternity dealing damage, you actually won't take any damage. Okay, that's all the mechanics, so let's put it all together. Phase 3 starts with the boss casting Cosmic Ascension and also throwing out an Infinite Duress buff. The entire raid should run out of the circle and stack up together on a marker that you put on the floor. The player with Infinite Duress should stand just behind the group, slightly closer to the edge. As soon as the swirlies spawn, dispel the duress, which will knock everyone safely out of the swirlies. By doing this, you'll also get all the asteroids stacked up nearby, which makes it far easier to break them with the meteor. Once everyone has safely gotten out of the swirlies, all DPS should hard focus the adds. You'll want to pop Bloodlust here for the first adds and blow them up. You'll then get the first meteor about 10 seconds after Cosmic Ascension. The targeted player should move towards the asteroids, but make sure the meteor is positioned to leave at least one asteroid behind, or you will wipe to Scouring Eternity. The meteor also leaves behind a small void zone on the ground after the initial explosion, which itself will explode after a few seconds, so get out of that. Following the meteor, you'll get your first Scouring Eternity, so hide behind the remaining asteroids. Alternatively, you can hide in the Shadow Realm, which has the added benefit of letting you collect the haste buff motes while you wait. The easiest way to send yourself down is to eat the Mote of Oblivion swirlies, each of which gives you 5 stacks of Oblivion. If you do this, make sure you don't accidentally come back up too early and get killed by the Scouring Eternity. During all of this, you'll also have Void Bombs spawning, so they should be handled by the same players as in Phase 2. From here, you'll basically go into rinse and repeat until the boss dies. For the rest of the Cosmic Ascensions, you should have some DPS intentionally go into the Shadow Realm and get their haste buff before the adds spawn to help kill them faster. If you're targeted by the hurtling barrage lines, move away from the rest of the raid and aim them towards the edges. You'll want to use healing cooldowns as necessary, and especially if the raid starts to get pretty high stacks of Oblivion. You should be aggressive with resetting your Oblivion stacks. If at any point you reach 5 or more stacks, go stand in one of the small swirlies, which will send you right to the Shadow Realm when it explodes. Get your haste buff while you're down there and then come back up and keep blasting. Stay safe, don't eat bad things, and finish off the boss. Congrats on AOTC. If you enjoyed this guide, remember to like it and make sure you're subscribed to the channel to catch all of our previews, guides, kill videos, and more. A big thank you again to Kingston Fury for making guides like these possible. From everyone here at Method, have a great day, and we'll see you next time.